Hey everybody. Today we are working on 8.2, dividing rational expressions. So dividing rational expressions, we want to do a flashback to elementary school when we learned how to divide fractions. So when you divide fractions, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So your teacher might have taught you different ways to do this, like keep, switch, flip, those sorts of things. So with the multiplying by the reciprocal, you keep the first fraction the same. You switch the sign to a multiply sign, and then you flip the second fraction over. And that's called multiplying by the reciprocal. Once you've done that, you can either cross simplify, or you can just multiply the tops together, and then multiply the bottoms together, and then simplify that fraction. This one simplifies really nicely down to a 2. If you had done cross simplifying instead, you could have found like numbers that the diagonals simplify by. So like 32 and 8, that turns into a 1, that turns into a 4 if you divide them both by 8. 6 and 12. 6 and 12 both can be divided by 6, turns into a 1, turns into a 2. And then we're left with a 4 over a 2, and 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So that's another way you can kind of approach it. So looking at the first problem, we've got a division sign. So very first thing we're always going to do with the division is we are going to flip over and multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to keep, switch the sign, and flip the second fraction. Then up to you if you want to cross simplify or if you would like to multiply across the top. So this would turn into a 6x to the 5th over 12x cubed. I like to put the numbers first. So then looking at 6 and 12, I know they're both divisible by 6. So this turns into a 1, this turns into a 2. And then my x's, we learned last unit, they would subtract. So 5 minus 3 would equal 2. So I'd be left with a 1x squared on the top, and the 1 can be invisible, and a 2 on the bottom. So that's simplified all the way. Number 2 is another way you're going to see dividing. So we know that a fraction sign means to divide. So just like if I'd seen it with a division sign, we are going to switch the bottom fraction over. So I'm going to multiply the top one by the bottom flipped over. So just to save myself some room. So now the bottom is gone, and I flipped it over, and now I'm multiplying by it. So just like last unit, I can look diagonally on the top and bottom and say, is there anything that matches that we can simplify? So this x minus 3 is a group, this x minus 3 is a group, so they would simplify to equal a 1, which turns invisible. X plus 2 and x plus 1, they do not match, so they stay the same. So we are left with an x plus 2 on the top and an x plus 1 on the bottom. And because those groups don't match, I cannot simplify those x's. So the x's stay with the plus signs. If there's a plus sign, it's got to be a whole group that divides. All right, number 3. I see a multiply sign. So my first step is I'm going to flip over the second fraction. So I'm left with a 10. A lot of times I like to try to factor as I rewrite it just to save myself writing. So notice here there's a GCF of 4. So underneath that 10, I could take out the 4 and I'd be left with x minus 2. And then as I flip over the other fraction, I notice a trinomial on the bottom. So I'm going to try to factor it while I write it. So there's a negative 6 and a 1. So that would give me 3 and negative 2. So now on the top, I've got an x plus 3 and an x minus 2. And on the top of the original, I see a GCF. So there's a GCF here that we could take out. So it looks like it's a GCF of 2x. So if I took out a 2x, I'd be left with x plus 3. So notice I flipped this fraction, but at the same time I factored everything just to have less steps of writing. All right, so looking at the top and at the bottom, I see x minus 2's that can simplify. I see x plus 3's that can simplify. The 2 and the 10, so they're both divisible by 2, so I can divide the 10 by 2 and get a 5, and this 2 just turns into a 1. The 5 and the 4 can't simplify, so I think we're done. So on the top, the only thing left is a 5. On the bottom, I've got a 4 times a 1, which is 4. And I've got this x, so we've got a 4x. So that looks kind of weird, but it's really like 5 over 4x is my final answer. All right, looking at number 2, I know I'm going to have to flip this because I see that division sign. So as I rewrite it, I'm going to notice any factoring that I can do. So I've got x minus 4. Ooh, if I see something squared, we know that means it happens twice. So that means this x minus 2 is going to happen, and then another x minus 2 will happen because it's squared. And I want to write them out so that I can try to cancel them. And then multiplying by, some factoring we can do. Looks like this one's difference of squares. So that's going to turn into x plus 2, x minus 2 as I rewrite it on the top. And then this is a trinomial, so we can do our factoring. So we've got negative 4 and negative 3. So negative 4 and a 1 would work. So I'm left with x minus 4 and x plus 1. Then we want to check the tops and bottoms for any groups that would simplify to a 1. So x minus 2 and x minus 2 can go. Notice only one of them can simplify. So this x minus 2 stays there because x minus 2 divided by x minus 2 equals 1. So only one group can go. X minus 4 and x minus 4 can go. And that's all that I see. So I'm left with an x plus 2 on the top, an x minus 2 on the bottom, and an x plus 1 on the bottom. And we keep them in factored form. All right, let's check out another one. So number 5, again, a reminder, the fraction means divide. So I'm going to flip over the bottom and then multiply it by the top. So as I do that, I'm going to look for any factoring we can do. So it looks like the top over here, there's a GCF of a 2. So I'm going to take out the 2, and I'm left with x minus 3. The bottom here is a trinomial, so I'm going to try to do this. 5 and 4 look like they work. So we've got an x plus 5 and an x plus 4. On the bottom fraction, as I flip it over, this x squared minus 9, I could do difference of squares. So that's now on the bottom of the fraction. So I'd have x plus 3, x minus 3. And the bottom is a trinomial, so I would try this. So I have a 4 and a 5. So we've got 1 and 4 that work. So I've got x plus 1, x plus 4. All right, let's check the tops and bottoms for things that can simplify. So x plus 4 and x plus 4 would equal 1. X minus 3 and x minus 3 would equal 1. And I don't see anything else that goes. So on the top, we're left with a 2 and an x plus 1, and an x plus 5, and an x plus 3. That looks like all the simplifying we can do. 6 is a little bit different. So 6 has 3 parts. So in the middle, we have a divided by. So I don't like to have anything divided by, so I want to change that to multiply. So if I wanted to make this a fraction, we can always put a 1 under something to make it a fraction. So as I do, because that's now a fraction, I can flip it over and change this to a multiply sign. So we'll be left with x plus 3 over x stays the same. I'm going to multiply by 1 over 4x plus 1. And I still have this times. Ooh, I can factor that top. This is difference of squares. I've got 2 perfect squares and a minus sign. So that'll be a 4x plus 1 and a 4x minus 1. And x plus 3 stays the same. So looking on the top and the bottom for groups that match, x plus 3 and x plus 3 equal 1. 4x plus 1, 4x plus 1 equal 1. And that's all that I see. So on the top, we've got a 1 times 4x minus 1. So that 1 can just be invisible. So we've got a 4x minus 1 on the top. And the only thing left on the bottom is an x. So that is where it would stay. All right, when you are ready, flip the page. Ooh, okay, another flashback to last time you did exponents. So when you have something like 4x to the negative 2, when you have a negative exponent, the thing that it's attached to is going to flip to either the top or the bottom. So if it's on the top, it's going to move to the bottom. If it was on the bottom, it would move to the top to make the negative exponent go away. So this 4 would stay on the top, and then the x squared would move to the bottom and become positive. So in number 7, I see this negative 1 exponent. So this whole thing that the negative 1 is attached to is going to go below the thing that it's attached to make it positive. So how this looks now is we've got that x plus 2 over x, I don't know why I wrote a 1 and said 2, x plus 2 over x minus 5, so that group's still there. And on the bottom we have an x, and then the x minus 5 is now on the bottom of that. And there's an invisible 1, but if something's to the invisible 1, you can just kind of ignore the 1. So it's just really x minus 5. Now we've handled that, we have a fraction over a fraction, so we're going to flip this over. So we have the x plus 2 over x minus 5, and now we're multiplying by this bottom flipped over. So x minus 5 is on top, and the x is on the bottom. So the x minus 5s would cancel, and then x plus 2 would stay on the top, and the x would stay on the bottom. And again, I can't simplify those x's because there's a plus sign attaching one of the x's to it too. All right, I would recommend you try number 8 before watching it, because I bet you could do it. So I know I'm going to flip this over, but as I do that, I want to factor. So on the top, I see a GCF of 2. So I'm going to take out a, we already did this problem. This problem was number 5 on the other page. So this is the same as number 5. So that was a mistake that I made, but I already printed our notes. So we're just going to skip that problem. So let's go down to number 9. All right, number 9. We have a fraction multiplied by 2 fractions being divided. So the fraction on the bottom is going to flip and become multiplying. So as I rewrite it, I'm going to try to factor things. So the x plus 1 stays the same. I can do difference of squares here. So I'm left with x plus 5, x minus 5, times the top fraction, the x minus 1 stays the same. This bottom is a trinomial, so I can try to factor it. So we've got -2, -1. So -2, +1 should work. So I've got x minus 2, x plus 1. And then I'm flipping over the fraction. As I do that, I notice I've got difference of squares here. So there's a lot of difference of squares. So it was on the top, now it's on the bottom. And the bottom's a trinomial, so I try the x. So we're left with 5 and -2. So x plus 5, x minus 2. So across all 3 fractions, we can look at the tops and the bottoms and see what would simplify. So I see an x plus 5 and x plus 5, an x plus 1 and x plus 1, x minus 1, x minus 1, x minus 2, x minus 2. The whole top is gone. Okay, so remember, when the whole top goes away, there's an invisible 1 on the top. So the 1 stays on the top, and the x minus 5 has to stay on the bottom, and the x plus 1 has to stay on the bottom. So if you need to write yourself a note, if everything in the numerator or on top cancels out and turns into 1s, you're going to put a 1 on the top. So the stuff on the bottom can't just magically go on the top. There's going to be a 1 there, and the stuff in the denominator stays in the denominator. All right, hopefully this was helpful, and good luck with your 8.2 practice.